What if the most chilling villain you ever meet is the whisper inside your own head? Today we're exploring the haunting world of psychological thrillers from the golden age of cinema, those masterful mind-benders from the 1930s through the 1950s that laid the groundwork for everything that followed. These are the films that first dared to explore the fragility of the human mind, the thin line between reality and delusion, and the darkness lurking within ordinary people. Let's begin our journey. Number 1. M, 1931. Fritz Lang's chilling masterpiece M stands as perhaps the definitive psychological thriller of the early sound era. The film follows Berlin's criminal underworld and police force as they simultaneously hunt for a child murderer, played with disturbing brilliance by Peter Lorre in his breakthrough role. What makes M revolutionary is its willingness to explore the mind of its monster, not to excuse his actions, but to present him as a tormented human being unable to control his darkest impulses. The scene where Lorre's character pleads for understanding before a kangaroo court of criminals remains one of cinema's most psychologically complex moments. Lang's use of sound, particularly the killer's haunting whistling of "In the Hall of the Mountain King," creates an atmosphere of dread that lingers long after viewing. M wasn't just ahead of its time. It created a template for psychological thrillers that filmmakers are still following nearly a century later. The film's German expressionist visual style, with its shadows and claustrophobic framing, perfectly mirrors the twisted psychology it explores. Number 2. Rebecca, 1940. Alfred Hitchcock's Hollywood debut and only film to win. Best Picture, Rebecca plunges viewers into a gothic nightmare of psychological manipulation. Based on Daphne du Maurier's novel, the film follows an unnamed young bride who marries the wealthy widower Maxime de Winter and returns with him to his imposing mansion, Manderley. There, she finds herself living in the shadow of Rebecca, Maxime's seemingly perfect first wife, whose presence is kept alive by the sinister housekeeper, Mrs. Danvers. Hitchcock masterfully crafts a suffocating atmosphere where the protagonist's growing paranoia and insecurity become almost unbearable. The film's power lies in its exploration of how a person can be psychologically terrorized, not by physical threats, but by memory and suggestion. Judith Anderson's Mrs. Danvers remains one of cinema's most chilling villains, precisely because her methods are psychological rather than physical. Despite the production code limitations of the era, Hitchcock found ways to explore deeply disturbing psychological territory, making Rebecca a template for countless psychological thrillers to come. Number 3. Gaslight, 1944. So influential, it gave its name to a psychological manipulation tactic we still reference today. George Cukor's Gaslight stars Ingrid Bergman as Paula, a woman whose husband Gregory systematically attempts to drive her insane. Set in foggy Victorian London, the film's claustrophobic interiors mirror Paula's increasingly trapped mental state as her husband isolates her, moves objects around the house, and makes her question her own perceptions. Most notably, the gaslight that dims without explanation. Bergman won her first Oscar for her portrayal of a woman on the edge of sanity, conveying both vulnerability and inner strength. The film's brilliance lies in how it puts viewers directly into Paula's psychological state, making us question along with her what is real and what is manipulation. Gaslight was revolutionary in its time for examining psychological abuse within marriage, a subject rarely broached in 1940s cinema. The film's exploration of how trust can be weaponized against someone remains unnervingly relevant. Though nearly 80 years old, the psychological mechanisms portrayed are so accurate that mental health professionals still reference the film when discussing manipulation tactics. Number 4. Spellbound, 1945. Hitchcock's fascinating dive into psychoanalysis follows Dr. Constance Peterson, a psychoanalyst who falls in love with the new head of her mental hospital, only to discover he's an imposter, suffering from amnesia and potentially a murderer. What follows is a race against time to unlock his repressed memories and prove his innocence. The film is most famous for its dream sequence designed by Salvador Dali, featuring giant eyes, distorted perspectives, and symbolic imagery that brought the subconscious mind to vivid life on screen. This was one of Hollywood's first serious attempts to visualize Freudian psychoanalysis, treating it not as pseudoscience, but as a legitimate way to understand trauma. Miklos Raza's theremin-heavy score heightens the sense of psychological disorientation. Though some of its psychological theories may seem dated today, Spellbound was groundbreaking in its time for suggesting that mental illness was not a character flaw, but the result of past trauma that could be healed. The film's snow-covered finale, where repressed memory and reality violently collide, remains one of Hitchcock's most psychologically astute sequences. Number 5. The Lost Weekend, 1945. Billy Wilder's unflinching portrait of alcoholism follows Don Burnham through a 4-day drinking binge, depicting his hallucinations, desperation, and psychological deterioration with a realism unprecedented for its time. The film was revolutionary in treating addiction not as a moral failing, but as a complex psychological condition. Millen's performance earned him an Oscar as he portrayed a man simultaneously self-aware and self-destructive. Wilder's camera work is particularly effective in conveying Burnham's psychological state, most memorably in the nightmarish sequence where Burnham hallucinates a bat attacking a mouse that emerges from a hole in his wall. The film's use of subjective camera techniques puts viewers uncomfortably inside the mind of a man losing his grip on reality. The Lost Weekend broke new ground in its willingness to explore the psychological aspects of addiction at a time when such issues were rarely discussed openly. The scenes of Burnham in the alcoholic ward of Bellevue Hospital provide a harrowing glimpse into how mental illness was treated in the 1940s. Despite studio concerns that audiences wouldn't watch a film about alcoholism, it became a critical and commercial success, proving that psychological complexity could be both artistically and commercially viable. Number 6. Notorious, 1946. Another Hitchcock masterpiece. Notorious stars Ingrid Bergman as Alicia Huberman, the daughter of a convicted Nazi spy who is recruited by government agent T.R. Devlin to infiltrate a group of Nazis in post-war Brazil. The psychological complexity emerges as Alicia and Devlin fall in love, only for him to push her into the arms and bed of Alexander Sebastian, a Nazi she must seduce for information. The film's genius lies in how it explores the psychological toll of using love and sex as weapons, and how jealousy and duty conflict within Devlin as he essentially prostitutes the woman he loves for patriotic ends. Hitchcock crafts scenes of unbearable tension as Alicia realizes she's being slowly poisoned by Sebastian and his mother after they discover her true identity. The famous long zoom shot from a high angle to an extreme close-up of a key in Alicia's hand remains one of cinema's most perfect visualizations of psychological focus amidst danger. Though constrained by the production code, Hitchcock and screenwriter Ben Hecht found ways to explore deeply adult themes of sexual manipulation, jealousy, and psychological warfare that were remarkably sophisticated for 1946 Hollywood. Number 7. The Spiral Staircase, 1946. Robert Siodmak's atmospheric thriller follows Helen, a mute servant working in a gloomy Victorian mansion during a storm, as she realizes a serial killer targeting imperfect women is inside the house. The killer's eye, shown in unsettling subjective shots that distort when looking at potential victims, reveals a psychologically disturbed mind that cannot tolerate physical imperfection. Helen's muteness makes her particularly vulnerable, both as a target for the killer and in her inability to call for help. Siodmak, trained in German expressionism, creates a house of shadows where danger lurks in every corner, and Helen's psychological terror builds to an almost unbearable degree. The film's exploration of ableism and the psychological impact of being vulnerable in a threatening world was ahead of its time. Maguire gives a remarkably expressive performance without speaking a word, conveying Helen's growing psychological terror through her eyes and body language. The film's rainy night setting, with its thunder and lightning illuminating shadowy interiors, created a template for countless psychological thrillers to come, demonstrating how the environment can reflect psychological states. Number 8. The Night of the Hunter, 1955. Charles Laughton's only directorial effort is a nightmare fairy tale following two children pursued by Reverend Harry Powell, a serial killer with love and hate tattooed on his knuckles who marries and murders widows for their money. The film operates in a psychological realm between realism and expressionistic nightmare, with surreal imagery like Powell riding a horse in silhouette against the horizon, or sitting in the cellar with a switchblade as Shelley Winter's car is pulled from the river with her body inside. Mitchum delivers one of cinema's most terrifying performances, as a man who has twisted religion to justify his psychopathy, believing he's doing God's work while satisfying his bloodlust. The film is particularly disturbing in how it portrays the vulnerability of children confronted with adult evil that no one else believes exists. Cinematographer Stanley Cortez creates unforgettable images influenced by German Expressionism and American Gothic that perfectly externalize the psychological horror of the story. Though a commercial failure upon release, The Night of the Hunter has been recognized as a psychological masterpiece that uniquely blends horror, noir, and fairy tale elements to create something wholly original. Number 9. Double Indemnity, 1944. Billy Wilder's definitive film noir follows insurance salesman Walter Neff as he's drawn into a murder plot by the seductive Phyllis Dietrichson. The film's psychological brilliance lies in how it portrays Neff's gradual moral corruption, not as a sudden fall, but as a series of small compromises that lead him deeper into a trap of his own making. The voiceover narration, delivered by a dying Neff, creates a sense of psychological inevitability as we witness a man recounting his own destruction with full awareness of how he engineered it. The chemistry between McMurray and Stanwyck crackles with sexual tension that the production code couldn't entirely suppress, showing how lust can overpower moral judgment. Edward G. Robinson delivers a superb performance as claims investigator Barton Keyes, whose insights into the criminal mind provide some of the film's most psychologically acute moments. The famous scene where Neff hides behind a door as Keyes talks about his little man inside, who tells him when something is wrong, demonstrates how intuition can piece together psychological puzzles. Wilder and Raymond Chandler's screenplay, based on James M. Cain's novel, is filled with double entendres and psychological subtext that rewards repeated viewings. Number 10. Laura, 1944. Otto Preminger's elegant noir follows Detective McPherson as he investigates the murder of the beautiful and charismatic Laura Hunt, only to find himself falling in love with her through the portraits and stories of those who knew her. The psychological twist comes midway through the film when Laura appears very much alive, throwing the investigation into chaos and forcing McPherson to reassess everything he thought he knew. The film explores obsession brilliantly, not just through McPherson's inappropriate feelings for a woman he believed dead, but through the character of Waldo Lydecker, a narcissistic columnist whose possessive love for Laura has deadly implications. The famous scene where McPherson falls asleep under Laura's portrait, only to awaken and find the real woman standing before him, is one of cinema's most perfect visualizations of the thin line between fantasy and reality. David Raksin's haunting theme perfectly captures the dreamy, obsessive quality that permeates the film. Laura stands apart from many noirs of its era by placing its psychological focus not just on crime and punishment, but on the nature of identity itself, how we construct images of others that may bear little resemblance to reality. Number 11. Shadow of a Doubt, 1943. Hitchcock's personal favorite among his films brings psychological terror to small-town America, as young Charlie slowly realizes her beloved Uncle Charlie is the merry widow murderer who strangles wealthy widows. The psychological horror builds as Charlie discovers her uncle, for whom she was named, and with whom she once believed she shared a telepathic bond, is a sociopathic killer. The film's power comes from its setting in idyllic Santa Rosa, California, suggesting that evil doesn't just exist in Gothic mansions or urban alleys, but in the heart of American domesticity. Cotton's performance is chilling precisely because of how charming he can be, revealing the sociopath's ability to maintain a convincing mask of normalcy. The famous dinner table scene where Uncle Charlie delivers a misogynistic tirade against widows offers a glimpse behind this mask at the hatred consuming him. The recurring motif of two Charlies as psychological doubles suggests the thin line separating ordinary people from monsters. Hitchcock considered this his most personal film, and its exploration of the darkness beneath small-town normality would influence countless psychological thrillers to come. Number 12. The Third Man, 1949. Carol Reed's post-war noir, set in divided Vienna, follows pulp writer Holly Martins as he investigates the supposed death of his childhood friend, Harry Lime, only to discover Lime is alive and involved in deeply immoral black market activities. The film's psychological dimensions emerge as Martins is forced to reconcile the Harry he thought he knew with the monster who dilutes penicillin for profit, causing the deaths and disabilities of innocent children. Robert Krasker's Oscar-winning cinematography, with its Dutch angles and stark shadows, perfectly captures the moral and psychological disorientation of post-war Europe. The famous Ferris wheel scene, where Lime justifies his actions by reducing his victims to dots far below, offers a chilling glimpse into the psychology of a man who has abandoned all moral constraints. Anton Karas's Zither score creates an atmosphere simultaneously jaunty and unsettling, mirroring the film's blend of friendship and betrayal. The final chase through Vienna's sewers represents not just a physical pursuit, but the moral reckoning Lime has been avoiding. Graham Greene's screenplay explores how we can be psychologically blind to the true nature of those closest to us, especially when confronted with charisma that masks monstrosity. Number 13. The Lady from Shanghai, 1947. Orson Welles' dizzying noir follows Irish sailor Michael O'Hara, Wells, as he becomes entangled with the beautiful Elsa Bannister, her disabled lawyer husband Arthur, and Arthur's partner George Grisby, in an increasingly convoluted murder plot. The film's psychological complexity lies in how it portrays a man gradually losing his moral compass as he's manipulated by forces he doesn't fully understand. The famous climactic shootout in a hall of mirrors physically represents the psychological hall of mirrors the characters have been navigating throughout, where nothing and no one is as they seem. Hayworth, her iconic red hair bleached blonde and cut short, delivers a mesmerizing performance as a femme fatale whose true motives remain enigmatic until the end. Wells's expressionistic direction creates a dreamlike atmosphere where psychological states are externalized through extreme camera angles, deep focus, and disorienting compositions. Though heavily re-edited by the studio, resulting in narrative jumps that sometimes confuse, these discontinuities paradoxically enhance the film's psychological impact, making viewers work to piece together its puzzle just as O'Hara must. Number 14. Sorry, Wrong Number, 1948. Anatole Litvak's claustrophobic thriller stars Barbara Stanwyck as Leona Stevenson, a bedridden woman with a heart condition who overhears a murder plot on a cross telephone line, only to gradually realize she is the intended victim. The film unfolds almost in real time as Leona, confined to her bed, desperately tries to piece together what's happening through phone calls, creating an unbearable psychological tension. Flashbacks reveal how Leona's controlling behavior drove her husband Henry to financial desperation and ultimately to plot her murder for insurance money. Stanwyck delivers a tour-de-force performance, conveying Leona's transformation from imperious invalid to terrified victim entirely from her bed. The film's psychological acuity lies in how it portrays Leona's growing awareness of how others truly perceive her, not as the center of their universe, but as an obstacle to be removed. The sound design is particularly effective, using telephone static, busy signals, and operator voices to create a sonic landscape of frustration and mounting dread. The film's final moments, as Leona hears the killer entering her house while she's on the phone with her husband, create a psychological terror that's all the more effective for what it doesn't show. Number 15. Diabolique, 1955. Henri-Georges Clouzot's masterpiece of psychological terror follows the wife and mistress of a brutal school headmaster as they conspire to murder him, only for his body to disappear, and increasingly strange events to suggest he might not be dead after all. The film builds an atmosphere of almost unbearable suspense as the two women, initially united in their plan, begin to doubt both each other and their own sanity. Clouzot, often called the French Hitchcock, crafts sequences of pure psychological horror, most famously when the supposedly dead man appears to rise from a bathtub. a scene that allegedly caused viewers to faint in theaters. The film's setting in a decrepit boarding school with its murky swimming pool creates a perfect backdrop for the psychological unraveling of its characters. Though technically French and slightly outside the traditional Hollywood Golden Age, Diabolique was enormously influential on American psychological thrillers and deserves inclusion for its perfect construction and devastating twist ending. The film's exploration of gaslighting and psychological manipulation set a standard that thrillers are still measuring themselves against nearly 7 decades later. Number 16. Touch of Evil, 1958. Orson Welles' Baroque noir masterpiece opens with one of cinema's most famous tracking shots, a 3-minute unbroken take following a car with a ticking bomb, and never lets up in its exploration of corruption, both institutional and psychological. Charlton Heston plays Mexican narcotics officer Mike Vargas, who becomes embroiled in a border town murder investigation controlled by corrupt American police captain Hank Quinlan. The psychological aspects emerge as Quinlan, once an honest cop with an uncanny intuition about guilt, has devolved into planting evidence to secure convictions. Welles gives himself no vanity as the bloated, sweating Quinlan, creating one of cinema's most complex corrupt officials. A man who began with good intentions, but whose psychological need for certainty led him to betray his badge. The film's border setting becomes a metaphor for moral boundaries crossed, while Henry Mancini's jazz-infused score heightens the sense of psychological disorientation. Janet Leigh's ordeal at the Mirador Motel, where she's terrorized by a leather-jacketed gang, creates a sense of psychological vulnerability that Leigh would revisit 2 years later in Psycho. Though recut by Universal against Welles' wishes, even in its compromised form, Touch of Evil remains a psychological thriller of unparalleled richness and complexity. Number 17. Strangers on a Train, 1951. Hitchcock's adaptation of Patricia Highsmith's novel centers on one of the most psychologically unsettling premises in thriller history. 2 strangers meet on a train, and one proposes they swap murders. He'll kill the person troubling the other, if the other will kill the person troubling him. Tennis star Guy Haines thinks it's just talk, but psychopathic Bruno Anthony is deadly serious and proceeds with his end of the bargain by murdering Guy's unfaithful wife. The film's psychological brilliance lies in Bruno, one of cinema's most chilling sociopaths, played with disturbing charm by Walker in what would be his final significant role before his untimely death. Bruno's fixation on Guy represents an externalization of Guy's own dark wishes. He wanted his wife dead, but lacked the moral bankruptcy to act on it. Bruno serves as Guy's psychological double, the id to his superego. The famous sequence where Bruno stalks his victim through a carnival, her glasses reflecting his approach in their lenses, remains one of cinema's most perfect visualizations of predatory intent. The film's climactic confrontation on an out-of-control carousel physically manifests the psychological tailspin Guy's life has become since his fateful train encounter. Number 18. Sunset Boulevard, 1950. Billy Wilder's Hollywood noir begins with its narrator already dead, floating face down in a swimming pool, a psychological framing that immediately signals we're in uncharted territory. The film follows struggling screenwriter Joe Gillis as he becomes the kept man of fated silent film star Norma Desmond, whose tenuous grip on reality slips further as the story progresses. The film's psychological acuity lies in its portrayal of Norma, not as a one-dimensional, crazy character, but as a woman who has constructed an elaborate fantasy world to protect herself from the unbearable truth of her obsolescence. Swanson, herself a former silent star, brings heartbreaking authenticity to Norma's delusions. The famous final scene, where Norma descends her staircase believing she's filming her comeback while actually being arrested for murder, represents one of cinema's most perfect depictions of a complete psychological break from reality. The film's exploration of Hollywood's psychological cruelty, how it worships youth and novelty while discarding those who age, gives Sunset Boulevard a bitter resonance that still feels contemporary. Erich von Stroheim's casting as Norma's butler Max, who was once her director and husband, adds another layer of psychological complexity to this unsparing portrait of Hollywood's dark side. Number 19. The Snake Pit, 1948. Anatole Litvak's groundbreaking film stars Olivia de Havilland as Virginia Cunningham, a woman who finds herself committed to a state mental hospital with no memory of how she got there. The film was revolutionary in its unflinching depiction of mental institution conditions and treatments in the 1940s, including electroconvulsive therapy and hydrotherapy. De Havilland delivers a fearless performance as a woman, struggling to reconstruct her identity while navigating an often dehumanizing system. The film's title refers to an ancient practice of throwing the mentally ill into pits of snakes, with the shock supposedly capable of restoring sanity, a metaphor for the sometimes barbaric treatments shown. The Snake Pit was among Hollywood's first serious examinations of mental illness, treating it not as a source of comedy or horror, but as a legitimate medical condition deserving of empathy and proper treatment. The film's impact went beyond entertainment. It reportedly inspired reforms in mental health facilities across America. Leo Genn provides solid support as the psychiatrist helping Virginia reconstruct her past trauma, using Freudian techniques that were cutting edge for the time. Though some of its psychological theories may seem dated today, the film's compassionate humanism and de Havilland's wrenching performance retain their power. Number 20. Suddenly, Last Summer, 1959. Joseph L. Mankiewicz's adaptation of Tennessee Williams's play stars Elizabeth Taylor as Catherine Holly, a young woman institutionalized for apparent insanity after witnessing the death of her cousin Sebastian during a European vacation. Katharine Hepburn plays Sebastian's mother, Violet, who wants Catherine lobotomized to silence her delusional account of Sebastian's death. Montgomery Clift is the conflicted neurosurgeon Dr. Kukrowicz, who must determine whether Catherine is truly insane or protecting a terrible truth. The film pushes against production code limitations in its coded but clear references to Sebastian's homosexuality and the disturbing circumstances of his death. Taylor delivers one of her finest performances in the climactic monologue, where Catherine's repressed memories emerge in a torrent of psychological trauma. The greenhouse where Violet tends carnivorous plants becomes a perfect metaphor for the predatory relationships at the story's center. Though sometimes theatrical in its approach, the film's willingness to explore taboo psychological territory, including cannibalism as metaphor, makes it remarkably daring for its era. The black and white cinematography by Jack Hildyard creates appropriately stark contrasts for this story of psychological extremes. Despite studio interference and production code constraints, Suddenly Last Summer remains a fascinating time capsule of how Hollywood of this era approached psychological disturbance and repressed trauma. Number 21. The Uninvited, 1944. Lewis Allen's atmospheric ghost story follows siblings Roderick and Pamela Fitzgerald, who purchase a suspiciously affordable cliffside house in Cornwall, only to discover it's haunted by the spirit of its former owner. Unlike many old dark house films of the era, The Uninvited treats its supernatural elements with psychological seriousness, suggesting that ghosts may be real manifestations of unresolved trauma and repressed secrets. The film centers on Stella, a young woman drawn to the house where her mother died under mysterious circumstances. As the siblings investigate, they uncover a complex story involving adultery, jealousy, and possible murder. The film's psychological sophistication lies in how it connects supernatural manifestations to human emotions. The eerie cold spots, the inexplicable sobbing, the scent of mimosa that accompanies spectral appearances. Cinematographer Charles Lang received an Oscar nomination for his evocative black and white photography, which creates a visual palette where psychological states and supernatural occurrences blend seamlessly. Russell's haunting performance as the psychologically vulnerable Stella adds poignancy, especially in light of the actress's real-life struggles with anxiety and alcoholism that would eventually claim her life at age 36. Number 22. The Lodger, 1944. John Brahms' atmospheric thriller, set in fog-shrouded Victorian London, follows an obsessive pathologist who rents a room in a family's home while secretly hunting women as Jack the Ripper. Krager's towering physical presence and suggestions of repressed sexuality make his portrayal of the Ripper psychologically complex, rather than simply monstrous. The film explores the psychological impact of living with unrecognized evil as the family initially welcomes this cultured, soft-spoken man into their home, with the daughter even developing romantic feelings for him. Brahm, a German émigré director, brings expressionist visual techniques to create a psychological landscape where shadows and fog mirror the moral ambiguity and hidden dangers. The film particularly focuses on the psychological vulnerability of women in a patriarchal society, where they're simultaneously idealized and victimized. Krieger's performance is all the more haunting, knowing that the actor, desperate to shed his heavy image, embarked on a crash diet that contributed to his fatal heart attack at age 31, shortly after completing this film. Though overshadowed by Hitchcock's earlier British film of the same name, this version of The Lodger stands as one of Hollywood's most psychologically nuanced takes on the Jack the Ripper legend. Number 23, Leave Her to Heaven, 1945, John M. Stahl's Technicolor noir, stars Jean Tierney as Ellen Barrett, a woman whose love becomes so possessive it transforms into something monstrous. The film's psychological complexity lies in Ellen, not a typical villain, but a woman whose pathological need to possess those she loves drives her to eliminate anyone who might claim their attention. The film's most shocking scene shows Ellen watching impassively as her husband's disabled brother drowns, refusing to help because his condition demands too much of her husband's care. Tierney, usually cast for her beauty, delivers a chilling performance that earned her an Oscar nomination, particularly in moments where Ellen's placid exterior briefly cracks to reveal the jealous rage beneath. Unlike the shadowy black and white world of most film noir, Leave Her to Heaven unfolds in vibrant technicolor, with lush natural settings contrasting with the psychological darkness of its story. Cinematographer Leon Shamroy won an Academy Award for his work, creating postcard-perfect images that serve as ironic backdrops to the psychological horror unfolding before them. The film's exploration of toxic love and pathological jealousy was unusually direct for its era, making Leave Her to Heaven a psychological thriller that still disturbs modern viewers. Number 24, Kiss of Death, 1947. Henry Hathaway's noir thriller follows small-time crook Nick Bianco, Victor Mature, as he becomes an informant against the sadistic gangster Tommy Udo to earn early parole and return to his family. Widmark's portrayal of Udo, with his high-pitched giggle as he pushes an old woman in a wheelchair down a flight of stairs, created one of cinema's most memorable psychopaths. What makes the film psychologically interesting is its exploration of the code of silence among criminals and the psychological toll of breaking it. Mature, often dismissed as merely a physical presence, delivers a nuanced performance as a man torn between criminal loyalty and family responsibility. The film's location shooting on the streets of New York adds documentary-like realism that contrasts with the psychological extremity of Widmark's character. Unlike many crime films of the era that portrayed gangsters as either glamorous or cartoonish, Kiss of Death presents Udo as something more disturbing, a man who genuinely enjoys inflicting pain. The film's title works on multiple levels, referring both to the betrayal that marks a man for death in the criminal world, and to Udo's habit of kissing his victims before killing them. While ostensibly a crime thriller, Kiss of Death functions equally well as a psychological study of betrayal, loyalty, and psychopathy. Number 25, The Red Shoes, 1948. Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger's Technicolor masterpiece follows ballerina Victoria Page as she's torn between her love for composer Julian Craster and her devotion to dance, personified by the demanding impresario Boris Lermontov. Though often categorized as a drama about artistic life, The Red Shoes functions equally well as a psychological thriller about obsession and the destructive power of art. The film takes its title from Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tale about enchanted shoes that force their wearer to dance until death, a metaphor the film literalizes in its stunning 17-minute ballet sequence that blends reality and fantasy as Victoria dances the role. Cinematographer Jack Cardiff's Technicolor photography creates a world of heightened emotion where psychological states are expressed through color and movement. The film's tragic conclusion, with Victoria forced to choose between love and art, represents one of cinema's most perfect visualizations of psychological impossible choice. Though initially a commercial disappointment in America, The Red Shoes has been recognized as a psychological masterpiece, with directors from Martin Scorsese to Brian De Palma citing its influence on their approach to visualizing psychological extremity. And there you have it, 25 psychological thrillers from cinema's golden age that continue to disturb, enthrall, and influence filmmakers today. These films prove that sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't supernatural creatures, but the darkness within ordinary people, the thin lines between love and obsession, sanity and madness. If you enjoyed this journey through the shadows of the human mind, hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into classic cinema on our Golden Age Classics channel. Drop a comment letting us know which of these psychological masterpieces is your favorite, or if there's a Golden Age thriller you think deserved a spot on our list. Until next time, remember, the most frightening journeys are often the ones that take place entirely within the mind.